Hello and welcome to Attack of the Famiclones HD. Over the next several videos, I'm going to be taking an in-depth look at Retrobit's newest product, the Super Retro Trio, which is a clone system that plays original Sega Genesis and Sega Mega Drive games, Super Nintendo and Super Famicom games, and NES games. This is a similar product to Hyperkin's Retron 3, which was released several years ago. However, unlike the Retron 3, this thing is absolutely worth picking up. For one thing, it's not a design nightmare. In fact, this system is really quite built well, and it's actually really well designed. Two things that, Retrobit is really much superior at than Hyperkin has in the past. They really do have a track record of being subsequently better. This system is better than, say, the Super Retro or the Retro Duo Portable. It's better than the Gen X, which in turn was better than their previous efforts, which were stuff like the Retro Duo. However, Hyperkin seems to have this trend where they have all their stuff is just kind of jumbled together and it's rather similar, and as such, it really is quite jarring when you compare say, the Retron 3 to this. And I've owned a Retron 3 before, and believe me, I know all about it. So, I'm not just saying this out of bias or anything. This is a really much better built system. So, over the next several videos, I'm going to be talking about its compatibility, its strengths, its weaknesses, tell you why this thing is, as of the recording of this video, the best clone system on the market. So stick around and make sure you don't only just watch this video, because this video is just going to be the overview. The next part we'll talk about the Sega Genesis port, the next part after that we'll talk about the Super Nintendo, and then after that will be the NES, and then finally a wrap-up video to talk about sort of the system overall. So click the annotations as they appear and you'll see they'll take you to the next part. I'll try and get these videos done in rapid succession so you don't have to wait too long for the next part. So anyway, with all that said, let's take a look at the system itself. Let's take out the games first. And here's the system. The system is roughly the same size as the Super Famicom or Super Nintendo. So if you're familiar with that sort of general size, this is basically the same size. It's also about the same weight. This system, for a clone system, does have quite a bit of heft to it, and that's because this is made with solid plastic. It's not that super light, cheap stuff that's used in a lot of other clones. Because of that, this system is really quite attractive, and it's well built. You can really tell that Retrobit took their time designing this thing. Let's look at the front panel here. The front panel, unlike the Retron 3, has all of its controller ports all in the front instead of them coming out of the sides and the front and all over the place. It comes with this kind of panel that goes over the controller inputs, and the idea here is that you push it in and it comes down like this, sort of like the dust flap on a TV. However, because I'm always going to be plugging stuff into this and I'm always going to be using this, I think this kind of looks ugly, so I just went and took the tabs and gently removed it. You notice on the edges here it's just got these little clips here and here. So if you want, you can simply remove this. Got to be careful not to break it, but you shouldn't have too much trouble. So this is optional if you want it, I guess, but I don't. So anyway, with that aside, it's got 6 different controller ports. It has the 2 Sega Genesis, 2 Super Nintendo, and 2 regular Nintendo controller ports. It also has a region switch. The region switch here is used for Sega Genesis games. It has NTSC, which is North America, PE, which is PAL Europe, NJ, NTSC Japan, that's Japan, and PA is PAL Asia. So usually, you're probably not going to be using PAL Asia because there's not many Mega Drive games that were released there. But you're probably going to be using North America, NTSC if you're in North America, PE if you live in Europe or any other PAL nation that is not in Asia. or NJ if you want to play your Japanese Mega Drive games. Mega Drive games are region locked for the most part, but it's very easy to just flick the switch and then you can play your games from whatever region. As well, it's got this other switch here, which is Genesis and NES and SNES, but I'll explain this later. Moving to the back of the system, it has very simple layout here. It's got its power supply, which is a 5-volt regulated power supply that outputs 5 volts DC and 1 amp. It has a positive center pin polarity, so if you lose the power supply, make sure you replace it with nothing higher than 5 volts and get the polarity right. This system does not need a voltage regulator because it uses, regulated voltage through its regulated power supply. So if you exceed the voltage, you will destroy the system. It does not have any sort of capacity to handle higher voltages than it needs because it doesn't have a voltage regulator, like I said, because it doesn't need one. It has RCA cables, it's composite video, and its left and right audio channels for stereo and mono. It also has the S-Video port. The S-Video port outputs video for all 3 consoles, although the NES side does not support S-Video because the NES hardware did not originally support S-Video in the first place. Because of this, the S-Video through the NES side is not actually true S-Video, it's just composite video passing through the luminescence port of the S-Video. So what you're getting is sort of pseudo S-Video, I guess. So if you're going to play your NES games on this system, it's probably better off unplugging the S-Video entirely and just using the straight composite port. However, if you're going to be using Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis games, both of them look significantly better if you're using the S-Video port as opposed to just the straight composite. Let's look at the front here. It's got its reset switch here, which is fairly easy to press, and it has a 4-state power switch here. It goes from off, Genesis, SNES, and NES. The unfortunate reality of this is because if you want to power your NES games, you have to power first the Genesis side, then the SNES side, and then the NES side, and then if you want to turn it off again, you have to power the SNES side, the Genesis side, and then off. Because of how that works, Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis games that use save files through their SRAM, through the batteries, those can actually get deleted if you rapidly power on and power off the system. So it's actually better off if you're going to play any RPG or any game that has a battery. It's actually better off if you play them just as the single cartridge into the system, so you don't have a Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis game if you want to play your NES game. Leave the cartridge ports empty if you're going to do that. That's just so you don't delete your game saves, because those systems or those games are temperamental that way. So that's just a pro tip for you guys. Yeah, next moving on is to talk about its controller. The Retro Duo or the Super Retro Trio comes with this controller, and yeah, that's right. This thing right here is a clone of the original Super Nintendo controller. So much so that they are exactly the same size, and actually, surprisingly enough, they have pretty much the same feel. This controller is a massive, massive improvement over Retrobit's earlier efforts, such as this one here, which is for the the Retro Duo Model 2.0. Compared to that, this is like a world of difference. Even though they look fairly similar, there is a huge difference in how they play and how they feel. These buttons here and then these buttons here are just incredibly different in their texture and their feel. This feels incredibly cheap, while this feels incredibly good in your hands. And nowhere more is that more evident than in the D-pad. In the Retro Duo 2.0, you can take the D-pad and press the entire D-pad inward all at the same time. And when you do that, it makes it really difficult to use. So when you've got to use this, you got to treat it sort of like you're using the keys on a keyboard by just pressing the very edges of them. As such, I never use this thing. I don't like this thing, and I would much prefer to use the original OEM controller. However, this one feels just fantastic in your hand. The D-pad cannot be pressed all in at once, although it somewhat can. It has a ball, just like the original Super Nintendo has a ball in the center to prevent you from doing that. So it pivots in the directions that you want. The two shoulder buttons, start and select, and you have your four face buttons. Now, just like the North American and just like the North American Super Nintendo controller, the Y and X buttons are concave, whereas the B and A buttons are convex. This means that these have sort of that OEM feel, and even though this is not an OEM controller, it is really, really good. What's really surprising about this is the fact that if you trace its cord, you come to this. Yeah, that's right. It's a DB9 connection. So this is really surprising and really strange, but believe it or not, this is actually a Sega Genesis controller. I know, I'll give you a moment to catch your breath there. This is a Sega Genesis controller, and this will actually work on a real Sega Genesis. You can plug this in into a Sega Genesis and it will work. You have the button mapping of the A, B, C, and then you have the X, Y, and finally the Z button. So again, that's A, B, C, X, Y, Z. And then start, mode, and D-pad. So this can be used for all Sega Genesis games, which I find incredibly strange to use the Super Nintendo or Super Nintendo-like controller on the Sega Genesis, but you can do it. And yeah, this is again one of the best things about this product. Retrobit has previously released an excellent controller called the Super Retro controller, which came with this Retro Duo portable bundle that they released initially. And that controller, I've sung its praises before too, but that is a downright Super Nintendo controller. It can only be used on the Super Nintendo and can't be used on the Sega Genesis. Whereas this can be used on the Sega Genesis, and if you have the Super Retro Trio, it can also be used to play your Super Nintendo games and your NES games. On the NES, the buttons are mapped to the Y and B buttons, and if you use an OEM Sega Genesis controller, you can also use that to play your NES games. And the OEM Sega Genesis controller uses the A and B buttons. So it's, you know, the same mapping, so it feels very strange to use a Sega Genesis controller to play NES games. What's even more strange is you can use a 6-button or a 3-button, if you want, Sega Genesis controller to play Super Nintendo games on this thing. And that's because the Super Retro Trio allows you to use Sega Genesis controllers for all 3 systems. So you can use this controller it comes with, or you can use an OEM Sega-produced controller or any third-party Sega controller to play Super Nintendo games, your NES games, and of course your Sega Genesis games. As well, this also supports Retrobit's other adapters, such as the standalone Retro port, although it's completely redundant here. Also the standalone Retro Gen, even though that's, again, completely redundant. And the Super Retro Advance, which is the Game Boy Advance adapter. Using a Sega Genesis controller to play Game Boy Advance games is gotta be, you know, one of the coolest things and also one of the strangest things you'll ever do in retro gaming. So, finally, yeah, so I'm gonna be talking in the next few parts about its compatibility. The next part I'll do is the Genesis port, because that's the first port in the front of the system. And I think actually that this is worth mentioning. The controller, the cartridge layout here is very well implemented and well thought. You have the smallest cartridge in the front and the biggest cartridge in the back. This is something that you might not consider until you start to look at the size of cartridges themselves, where you have the massive NES games, and then you have the somewhat smaller Super Nintendo games, and then the somewhat smaller than that Sega Genesis games. Just as these scale in size, you have them available to the cartridge ports in the back. So you have the biggest go in the back, medium in the middle, and then smallest in the front. And as this, it kind of looks like a series of steps. And it really works well to the advantage of the system. So again, guys, click the annotations right here. They'll take you to the next part. Just wait till I upload, obviously the next part. But other than that, I'll see you guys next time for part 2, which will take a look at the Sega Genesis and take a look at its compatibility and some of its awesome games. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.